It all started on an ordinary Saturday morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood where every lawn was manicured, every mailbox aligned, and every house conformed to the unspoken standards enforced by the local homeowners association. The garage in question had long been an afterthought, a neglected space filled with dusty boxers, half-forgotten sports equipment, and tools that hadn't seen daylight in years. Its potential had gone unnoticed, overshadowed by the pressures of conformity that hovered over the neighborhood like a silent authority. The homeowner, however, had grown tired of the mundane. He envisioned a space that was uniquely his, a place where creativity, relaxation, and personal expression could coexist without compromise. He dreamed of a man-cave sanctuary within his own property that reflected his personality, interests, and hobbies. The idea was simple: clear out the clutter, install shelving for organization, upgrade the flooring, and bring in furniture that balanced comfort and functionality. What he didn't anticipate was the immediate attention this project would attract from the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of order. Karen. Karen had lived across the street for over a decade, a figure of unrelenting scrutiny and an unshakable commitment to HOA rules. She knew every guideline, no matter how obscure, and she wielded them like weapons. Her mornings were often spent strolling the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, noting infractions anything from slightly tilted garden gnomes to paint colors deemed unacceptable. The moment she spotted the garage door open and activity behind it, her interest piqued. She saw not a home improvement, but a potential violation, a crack in the wall of conformity she had spent years reinforcing. Meanwhile, the homeowner proceeded without hesitation. The first days were consumed with removal. Boxes were sorted, broken items discarded, and valuable tools organized. Each step revealed the latent potential of the space. Old cobwebs gave way to freshly painted walls. Dim corners were illuminated with strategically placed lighting. The rough concrete floor was replaced with durable, stylish tiles, transforming the once ignored garage into a clean, inviting canvas. The sense of progress was palpable. Neighbors began to notice the change. Some offered compliments, others quietly observed, and a few whispered their curiosity from across the street. The project, though modest in scale, immediately drew attention because it challenged the invisible norms of the community. The garage was no longer just a storage area. It was becoming a statement, a declaration of personal freedom within a neighborhood bound by rules. Karen, of course, did not appreciate statements of independence. She began her surveillance, taking note of every modification, every new shelf, every paint swatch. By midweek, she had formulated her initial response, a letter citing alleged violations of HOA rules regarding structural modifications and exterior appearance. The homeowner, upon receiving the letter, felt a mix of amusement and frustration. The accusations were baseless. No structural changes had been made. The work was entirely interior, confined within the four walls of his property. Yet Karen's interpretation of authority left no room for common sense. Rather than retreat, the homeowner chose to escalate strategically. He saw an opportunity to transform a simple project into a larger statement, not just about personal freedom, but about accountability, autonomy, and clever navigation of neighborhood politics. He began documenting every stage of the man cave's transformation. Photographs were taken, receipts organized, and progress meticulously logged. This archive served both practical and symbolic purposes. It proved that the project adhered to legal and HOA regulations, while also laying the foundation for a narrative that would be impossible to refute. The garage's transformation accelerated. Shelving units were installed with precision, capable of holding tools, memorabilia, and collections with ease. A small entertainment corner took shape, complete with a media setup and comfortable seating. Vintage decor and personal touches gave the space character, emphasizing that this was not merely a storage area, but a reflection of personality and taste. Ambient lighting and strategically placed artwork created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Each addition reinforced the garage's evolving identity as a man cave sanctuary, immune to external criticism, built with thoughtfulness and care. Karen's attempts to assert control escalated in tandem with the homeowner's progress. Notes were slipped under doors, additional letters arrived, and complaints were whispered among neighbors who had long accepted her authority. Yet, Each challenge she presented was met with calm, deliberate responses. The homeowner never engaged in confrontation. Instead, he allowed the evidence to speak for itself. Every improvement was documented, every step compliant with HOA regulations, leaving Karen with little to leverage beyond her own sense of entitlement. By the end of the first week, the garage had undergone a transformation that extended far beyond physical improvements. It became a symbol of subtle defiance, of careful planning, and of patience. Each wall, shelf, and fixture was more than a functional addition. It was a statement of independence in the face of arbitrary authority. The homeowner understood that the project was no longer just about a man cave. It was about asserting control over one's property, about challenging unnecessary oversight, and about showing neighbors that compliance with common sense and legality was both possible and powerful. The stage was now set for the next chapter of the battle, a confrontation between meticulous preparation and unchecked authority. Karen, watching from across the street, had underestimated the homeowner's patience, strategy, and foresight. What began as a simple garage renovation was transforming into a full-scale neighborhood spectacle, one that would test the limits of HOA power, expose the absurdity of arbitrary rules, and redefine the meaning of personal space within the community. And so, as the garage lights glowed warmly into the evening and the last boxers were stacked neatly on their shelves, the homeowner stood back to admire the progress. The space was ready not just as a man cave, but as a declaration. Karen had made her first move, but she had underestimated the preparation, strategy, and determination behind it. The battle for the garage, and for the homeowner's right to enjoy his property on his own terms, had only just begun. The morning after the homeowner completed the initial setup of his man cave, the neighborhood seemed to hum with anticipation. Suburban life, usually predictable and orderly, had begun to ripple with the subtle tension of what some might later call the garage incident. The neatly organized shelves, freshly painted walls, and glowing lights that now framed the interior of the garage were no longer private. They had become a public statement, and Karen's attention had shifted from casual disapproval to strategic escalation. Karen, armed with her clipboard and a rigid interpretation of HOA rules, began a systematic campaign to assert her authority. Each day, she walked the perimeter of the homeowner's property, scrutinizing every detail through narrowed eyes. She photographed angles of the garage that might suggest violations, noting even the smallest deviations from what she considered acceptable. The HOA had guidelines, and she intended to apply them with precision, regardless of practicality, legality, or fairness. Every light strand, every decoration, every tool carefully stored on a shelf was cataloged in her mental dossier, ready to be reported to the board. Meanwhile, the homeowner remained calm. He understood that Karen's power was largely performative, reinforced by her neighbor's fear of confrontation. By documenting every phase of the garage's transformation, he had insulated himself against her accusations. Photographs were systematically time-stamped, receipts and invoices meticulously filed, and plans were stored digitally to ensure clarity and transparency. His preparation was not merely for his own protection. It was the foundation of a strategy that would turn Karen's obsession into an opportunity. Karen's escalation was deliberate. The letters arrived first, slipped under doors in the early hours, each one more insistent than the last. They cited obscure sections of HOA regulations, claiming structural modifications and unauthorized lighting. The language was designed to intimidate, invoking fines and legal consequences. The homeowner read each letter with quiet amusement. The threats were empty. He had adhered to every enforceable rule. But the letters served a purpose. They revealed Karen's tactics, her patterns of overreach, and the intensity of her fixation. Every accusation became a piece of intelligence, a way to anticipate her next move. The man cave, meanwhile, continued to evolve. With each passing day, the homeowner refined the space. A small workshop corner allowed for hobbies such as woodworking and electronics, adding functionality without altering the garage's footprint. Ambient lighting was installed to highlight both the decor and the craftsmanship, casting the space in a warm, inviting glow. Every fixture was selected for compliance and aesthetic appeal, a subtle challenge to Karen's insistence that order meant uniformity. The garage became a testament to creativity, patience, and deliberate strategy. Neighbors, initially hesitant to comment, began to notice the subtle shifts in the neighborhood dynamic. Conversations at mailboxes, casual walks, and quiet coffee exchanges revealed that Karen's influence, while significant, was not absolute. Many residents quietly admired the homeowner's initiative, appreciating the balance of aesthetics and practicality in the man cave. Some even confided stories of their own experiences with overreach trivial fines for minor infractions, unexplained reprimands, and the lingering sense that the XOA's authority had been wielded arbitrarily. Slowly, a quiet awareness began to spread. The homeowner was not just defending his garage, he was challenging a culture of unchecked control. Karen, sensing that mere letters were insufficient, sought to escalate further. She contacted the HOA board directly, framing the situation as a violation that demanded immediate intervention. She emphasized the alleged structural modifications, the unauthorized lighting, and the threat to neighborhood uniformity. Her narrative painted the homeowner as a rogue element, a destabilizing presence that required correction. The board, accustomed to her vigilance and the fear she instilled in residents, prepared to act. They drafted official notices, citing fines and potential legal action. The homeowner, anticipating this, remained strategic. He began to document every interaction, every notice, and every email. Digital backups ensured that nothing could be lost or altered. Security cameras, discreetly installed around the property, captured routine interactions in Karen's presence near the garage. The homeowner knew that transparency and evidence were more powerful than confrontation. By maintaining an unassailable record, he transformed Karen's obsession from a potential liability into a tool for exposing the absurdity of her overreach. As the days progressed, the garage became more than a physical space. It was a symbol of deliberate resistance. Each organized shelf, each carefully placed light, and every decorative choice was a testament to autonomy within the confines of HOA regulations. Karen's attempts to control the project, though aggressive, only highlighted the homeowner's meticulous preparation and strategic foresight. The conflict was no longer simply about a garage. It was about the limits of authority, the power of preparation, and the assertion of personal rights. The tension reached a peak when the first official fine notice arrived. The document, typed and signed by the HOA president at Karen's insistence, outlined penalties for non-compliance and demanded immediate remediation. The homeowner carefully cataloged the notice, noting the date, time, and contents. He recognized that the fine, rather than a threat, was an opportunity. It provided a tangible example of overreach, a document that would later serve as evidence of arbitrary authority and the misuse of power. Every challenge Karen presented became a stepping stone toward a broader strategy of exposure and eventual triumph. By the end of the week, the garage was fully operational as a man cave, each corner arranged for both functionality and style. Ambient lighting bathed the space in a warm glow. Shelves were stocked with tools and collectibles, and the workshop corner reflected careful planning and creativity. Karen's surveillance, letters, and fines were all met with calm documentation and strategic preparation. The stage was set for the next phase, turning Karen's obsession into a spectacle that would reveal the flaws in her authority, challenge the HOA's overreach, and cement the garage as a symbol of autonomy and clever defiance. As evening fell, the homeowner stood in the center of the newly transformed garage, surveying the space. The hum of nearby traffic and the quiet houses of the neighborhood contrasted sharply with the tension simmering just across the street. Karen, oblivious to the homeowner's strategic advantage, continued her patrols and observations, unaware that every move she made was being meticulously recorded. The battle lines had been drawn, but the homeowner held the upper hand, armed with patience, evidence, and the knowledge that preparation could outmaneuver even the most aggressive adversary. With the man cave fully operational and Karen's letters piling up, the homeowner understood that mere compliance and documentation would not be enough to resolve the escalating conflict. Karen's obsession had shifted from passive observation to active interference, and the HOA's looming fines added an official weight to her scrutiny. The garage, once a personal sanctuary, had now become the front line in a subtle but high-stakes battle of wills. Every shelf, light fixture, and tool placement was not just functional, it was strategic, part of a larger plan to withstand, expose, and ultimately undermine Karen's authority. The first step in the counterattack was visibility. While the HOA believed that intimidation and procedural threats could bend residents to their will, the homeowner recognized that the true power lay in transparency. Security cameras, discreetly positioned around the garage, began recording not only the exterior but also interactions between Karen, neighbors, and contractors involved in the maintenance of the property. Every step she took, every photograph she snapped, and every letter she delivered became part of a growing dossier. The homeowner meticulously labeled and cataloged each incident, creating a timeline that illustrated the pattern of harassment and obsession. Neighbors, initially hesitant to intervene or comment, began to notice subtle signs of change. The garage's exterior, visible through the driveway and open garage door, displayed carefully placed lighting that illuminated the area without violating HOA restrictions. Small banners and seasonal decorations were displayed in compliance with guidelines, yet arranged in a way that amplified the visibility of the homeowner's property. It was a quiet but unmistakable statement. The garage was compliant, prepared, and strategically unassailable. This display subtly undermined Karen's claims, revealing the weakness in her arguments while maintaining the homeowner's position as a law-abiding resident. The homeowner also began to study the HOA's procedural weaknesses. Letters and fines, while intimidating, often contained minor errors in language, referencing incorrect clauses or failing to cite necessary approvals. By cross-referencing the HOA bylaws with state property codes, the homeowner identified loopholes and inconsistencies. Each discovery was carefully noted, forming a growing record of procedural missteps. This legal research, combined with meticulous documentation, transformed a personal conflict into a carefully prepared countermeasure against arbitrary authority. Karen, undeterred by the initial setbacks, escalated further. She approached the HOA board repeatedly, insisting on immediate enforcement actions. Her letters became more formal, citing penalties for non-compliance and emphasizing neighborhood uniformity as a justification for fines. Yet each attempt, when carefully reviewed against the homeowner's records, revealed gaps in reasoning and procedural oversights. The homeowner remained patient, understanding that overreach often carries its own consequences when exposed with evidence and clarity. The homeowner also leveraged subtle psychological strategies by openly working in the garage at regular hours, maintaining visible organization, and interacting courteously with neighbors. He projected confidence and authority. Karen's attempts to provoke confrontation were met with calm observation rather than reaction, reducing the effectiveness of her intimidation tactics. Neighbors, observing these interactions, began to quietly align with the homeowner's perspective. A sense of shared awareness started to emerge. Karen's obsession was disproportionate, and the HOA's authority could be questioned when backed by careful documentation. Meanwhile, the garage itself became a tool of psychological impact. Each lighting adjustment, each perfectly aligned shelf, and each meticulously placed decoration communicated order, compliance, and preparation. The space conveyed a message without words. Every action was deliberate, every rule observed, and every potential accusation anticipated. Karen, focused solely on identifying violations, failed to perceive the homeowner's strategic use of space as both protection and statement. The garage had evolved from a personal retreat into a fortress of evidence, capable of withstanding scrutiny while reinforcing the homeowner's moral and legal position. The first major breakthrough came when the homeowner discovered a procedural misstep in one of Karen's formal complaints. The notice of fine cited an outdated section of the HOA rules that had been amended months prior, rendering the penalty technically invalid. By documenting this, along with a timeline of amendments and the HOA's failure to update residents formally, the homeowner created a refutable proof of administrative oversight. This evidence became the cornerstone of the next phase of the counterattack, exposing the HOA's errors while demonstrating the homeowner's unwavering compliance. To consolidate his position, the homeowner began sharing subtle but strategic updates with neighbors. Casual remarks about following HOA rules, visible organization of documents, and quiet demonstrations of adherence to regulations created a narrative of lawfulness and competence. Neighbors began to recognize the contrast between Karen's aggressive enforcement and the homeowner's meticulous compliance. Word spread quietly, creating a network of awareness that would later amplify the impact of the homeowner's eventual exposure of the HOA's overreach. Karen, sensing resistance, attempted one final preemptive measure, organizing a neighborhood inspection under the guise of compliance checks. She arrived early, clipboard in hand, documenting every minor detail. However, every item she noted had already been addressed. Lights were correctly installed, shelves aligned, and the garage interior complied fully with both HOA and municipal regulations. Her inspection, intended to intimidate, instead highlighted the homeowner's diligence and foresight. Each carefully documented observation became further proof of her obsession rather than the homeowner's non-compliance. By the end of this phase, the homeowner had achieved a psychological and procedural upper hand. Karen's actions, rather than undermining his authority, had inadvertently reinforced it. Every letter, inspection, and threat was catalogued, time-stamped, and framed as part of a growing narrative of arbitrary enforcement and obsession. The HOA board, largely reliant on Karen's reports, began to realize that enforcement without substantive violations was increasingly untenable. The stage was now set for the next phase, transforming this carefully curated collection of evidence into a formal challenge to the HOA's authority, leveraging both legal documentation and community awareness. The garage, fully functional as a man cave, now served as a command center for the homeowner's strategic operations. Each tool, light, and organized shelf was part of a larger plan to expose overreach, protect personal rights, and ultimately claim victory in a conflict that had escalated far beyond a simple home improvement project. As night fell, the glow of the man cave light spilled into the driveway, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Karen, making her final rounds for the evening, paused briefly to observe the illuminated space. Her expression betrayed frustration and disbelief. She had not anticipated such preparation, such strategic foresight, or such unyielding calm. Every attempt to intimidate had been countered with meticulous evidence, and every overreach had been transformed into a tool for the homeowner's victory. The battle lines were drawn, but for the first time, it was clear who held the advantage. With Karen's obsession documented and every HOA complaint cataloged, the homeowner understood that the next phase required consolidation. The man cave had served its initial purpose: protection, visibility, and psychological deterrence. Now, it was time to transform it into a strategic headquarters, a place from which he could systematically build a case so airtight that the HOA board, and Karen herself, could not deny the mounting evidence. Every letter, every notice, every inspection report was meticulously organized, creating a timeline that would leave no room for ambiguity. The first task was digitization. Physical letters and notices were scanned, time-stamped, and stored on encrypted drives, ensuring that nothing could be lost or altered. Each document was categorized by type: letters of complaint, inspection notices, fines, and HOA board communications. Cross-referencing these with HOA bylaws and municipal codes, the homeowner identified inconsistencies, procedural errors, and outright overreach. What had once seemed like petty harassment now formed a clear pattern of selective enforcement, fueled by personal vendettas rather than legitimate community concerns. Security footage became the next layer of evidence. Cameras installed around the garage, driveway, and surrounding property had captured every visit, every photo snapped, and every interaction between Karen and neighbors. Clips were labeled by date, time, and subject matter, creating a visual record that complemented the textual documentation. Footage of Karen scrutinizing the garage, lingering in ways that served no practical purpose, and attempting to rally other residents highlighted the obsessive and intrusive nature of her campaign. Each video clip reinforced the narrative. The homeowner was compliant, methodical, and fully aware of every rule, while Karen's actions were driven by personal animosity. In parallel, the homeowner began documenting the physical layout and modifications of the garage itself. Every light fixture, shelf, and decoration was photographed, with notes detailing compliance with HOA rules and municipal codes. Measurements were taken to confirm that no structural modifications had occurred without approval. Paint receipts, hardware purchases, and contractor invoices were compiled into a chronological ledger that proved every step of the renovation adhered to regulations. This meticulous record left no room for claims of violation, directly countering any HOA assertion that the man cave constituted The homeowner then expanded his focus to Karen's influence on the HOA board. Board meeting minutes, accessible through formal requests, revealed that Karen had repeatedly pressed for enforcement actions based on subjective interpretations of the rules. Notes indicated that her recommendations often lacked evidence or procedural validity, yet they had been acted upon without proper review. By compiling these instances, the homeowner established a clear connection between personal bias and administrative action, exposing the vulnerability of the HOA's enforcement processes to manipulation. Neighbor testimonies became an invaluable component of the evidence arsenal. Quiet conversations with residents who had observed Karen's behavior or experienced similar harassment were documented, creating a network of corroborating accounts. Each testimony, signed and time-stamped, provided context to the formal evidence, illustrating that the conflict was not isolated to a single homeowner, but part of a broader pattern affecting multiple residents. This community-based validation strengthened the homeowner's case, transforming personal frustration into collective awareness. To further fortify the argument, the homeowner began compiling a compliance checklist for the garage and surrounding property. Every element, lighting, shelving, decorations, driveway use was verified against HOA rules and municipal ordinances. Photos accompanied each checklist item, creating a visual index of adherence. Any claim by Karen or the HOA board that the garage violated standards could now be immediately disproven with precise, irrefutable documentation. Financial scrutiny was the next logical step. HOA records, when obtained, revealed vague expenditure categories and inconsistent allocations. By cross-referencing budget lines with physical inspections and neighbor observations, the homeowner identified discrepancies in claimed expenses for community projects and maintenance. Payments to contractors linked to board members without competitive bids were highlighted as examples of preferential treatment. This layer of financial documentation exposed weaknesses in the HOA's governance and further undermined Karen's credibility as an advocate for community standards. Simultaneously, the homeowner maintained a detailed log of communication with the HOA emails. Certified letters and official responses were organized chronologically, demonstrating repeated attempts at dialogue and compliance. Every request for clarification, every submission of documentation, and every official reply reinforced the homeowner's position: cooperative, law-abiding, and methodical. In contrast, Karen's aggressive communications, often lacking substance or procedural basis, stood out as arbitrary and personal attacks. The culmination of these efforts was a comprehensive dossier, housed entirely within the man cave. This repository contained scanned documents, video footage, photos, financial analyses, neighbor statements, and procedural time. Each piece was cross-referenced and annotated, creating an accessible yet detailed narrative of events. The homeowner could now present a single, coherent story that traced Karen's harassment, the HOA board's overreach, and the homeowner's unwavering compliance and diligence. As the dossier neared completion, the homeowner began strategic planning for its deployment. The goal was not confrontation for its own sake, but to expose systemic flaws in HOA enforcement, validate his compliance, and rally community awareness. By demonstrating preparation, evidence, and transparency, the homeowner ensured that any public presentation or meeting would be framed around facts, leaving little room for denial or manipulation. The man cave, now more than a personal retreat, had evolved into a command center. Walls lined with documents, monitors displaying footage, and neatly organized shelves of supporting materials communicated a single truth. Preparation, evidence, and patience had transformed a conflict into a strategic advantage. Karen's obsession, once now became an inadvertent contributor to the homeowner's meticulously curated record of compliance and harassment. Finally, the homeowner anticipated Karen's next move. Any attempt at renewed complaints or inspections would be met not with emotional reaction but with procedural counteraction, clear evidence, documented compliance, and strategic presentation to the HOA board and community members. By controlling the narrative through meticulous organization and transparency, the homeowner had turned a personal feud into a structured, evidence-based challenge capable of neutralizing arbitrary authority. Night after night, as lights glowed from the garage and footage scrolled on monitors, the homeowner reviewed the dossier. Each element fit into a larger story of vigilance, preparation, and calculated action. Karen's relentless pursuit, once intimidating, had become a catalyst for empowerment, forcing the homeowner to establish a level of documentation and awareness that would ultimately safeguard not only his own property, but also provide a model for other residents facing arbitrary HOA enforcement. With the dossier complete and every piece of evidence meticulously organized, the homeowner understood that the next phase required action beyond the confines of the garage. The man cave, once a private sanctuary, had served its purpose. It was now a strategic command center, a repository of proof, and a place where the homeowner had anticipated every potential move from Karen and the HOA board. Yet private documentation alone could not resolve the conflict. It needed a platform, a stage on which facts could confront arbitrary authority. The homeowner began preparing for a public exposure that would leave no room for misinterpretation or dismissal. The first step was outreach to neighbors. Quietly, subtly, the homeowner communicated with residents who had previously witnessed Karen's behavior or had experienced similar harassment. Flyers, polite invitations, and digital messages encouraged attendance at the upcoming HOA meeting without explicitly detailing the confrontation that would unfold. The emphasis was on transparency and community involvement rather than personal vendetta, a framing that positioned the homeowner not as an agitator, but as a concerned resident seeking clarity and fairness. Attention then turned to the meeting space itself. The homeowner arrived early on the appointed day, bringing laptops, projectors, and printed documents. Every seat was arranged for optimal visibility, every monitor positioned to display evidence clearly, and every printed copy of correspondence, invoices, and compliance checklists prepared for distribution. The garage had trained him for this moment. Years of meticulous organization, archiving, and strategic planning now translated into a professional, methodical presentation. When residents began to arrive, their curiosity quickly shifted to engagement. Many had endured Karen's relentless scrutiny, witnessing arbitrary citations or unexplained fines, and now they saw an opportunity to understand the larger picture. The homeowner provided handouts summarizing the timeline, clearly identifying instances where HOA enforcement had strayed from documented regulations. This step was critical. By providing residents with tangible material, the homeowner allowed them to analyze the situation independently, creating a sense of personal investment in the outcome. As the meeting commenced, the homeowner systematically presented the evidence. Scanned letters from the HOA were displayed alongside timestamps, showing repeated requests for clarification and subsequent arbitrary fines. Video clips from the driveway and neighborhood highlighted Karen's obsessive monitoring, lingering inspections, and attempts to sway other residents. Every claim she had made regarding garage compliance, driveway use, and decorative elements was countered with irrefutable documentation, photographs, and witness accounts. Financial analysis added another dimension to the exposure. Budget discrepancies, preferential contracting, and procedural irregularities were illustrated with charts and cross-references to municipal codes and HOA bylaws. Residents began to recognize patterns. The arbitrary enforcement they had observed was not random, but systematic, and often driven by personal biases, rather than objective standards. Each visual aid reinforced the narrative, making abstract claims concrete and undeniable. Karen's attempts to interject were met not with confrontation, but with structured evidence. The homeowner had anticipated objections, preparing specific counterpoints and procedural references for every possible argument. This preemptive strategy neutralized intimidation, shifting the balance of authority. As residents reviewed the materials and corroborating testimonies, whispers spread, signaling recognition and growing outrage. What had once been a one-sided feud now transformed into a collective awareness, with Karen's influence visibly diminishing in the eyes of her peers. The homeowner then transitioned to procedural transparency. Copies of HOA bylaws, municipal ordinances, and compliance checklists were distributed, showing clearly that every modification to the garage and driveway had adhered to the rules. By juxtaposing Karen's complaints with documented compliance, the homeowner reframed the narrative. Any alleged violation was not only unsubstantiated, but demonstrably false. This objective, fact-based approach further empowered residents to question previous enforcement actions and consider the integrity of the HOA's decision-making processes. Neighbor testimonies were incorporated next. Individuals who had previously been hesitant to speak were now emboldened, confirming observations of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and Karen's obsession with trivial details. Each account reinforced the narrative established by physical and digital documentation, transforming anecdotal experiences into a coherent, community-wide pattern. The collective voice of residents added weight to the presentation, illustrating that the issue was neither isolated nor personal, it was systemic. As the meeting progressed, tension in the room shifted from uncertainty to confrontation. Karen's objections, once commanding attention, were drowned out by evidence, community corroboration, and structured presentation. The homeowner's strategic patience, built over weeks of meticulous documentation and analysis, ensured that every argument could be countered, every claim verified, and every procedural misstep highlighted. By relying on verifiable facts rather than emotional rhetoric, the homeowner effectively dismantled the narrative of arbitrary authority that Karen had attempted to construct. The culmination of the exposure was a moment of undeniable clarity, a side-by-side comparison of HOA claims and documented evidence, presented on large screens for all residents to see, left little room for denial. Letters, invoices, photographs, and video footage collectively told a story of selective enforcement, procedural errors, and personal vendettas. Karen's obsessive monitoring, once intimidating, now appeared as a catalyst for exposure rather than a tool of control. The community, witnessing this narrative in real time, began to realize the scope of authority, abuse, and the importance of procedural accountability. By the end of the meeting, a shift had occurred. Residents, previously passive, now engaged actively, questioning the board's decisions, demanding transparency, and advocating for accountability. Karen, once a dominant force in enforcing HOA rules, was visibly diminished, her influence undermined by the homeowner's methodical, evidence-based strategy. The balance of power had shifted from arbitrary authority to informed collective awareness, marking a turning point in community governance. The homeowner's man cave, meticulously organized and fortified with evidence, had fulfilled its ultimate purpose. It had enabled a controlled, strategic exposure that transformed personal harassment into a community-wide reckoning. Karen's attempts to control, intimidate, and dominate were neutralized by preparation, transparency, and the collective engagement of informed residents. As the meeting concluded, residents began informal discussions about future enforcement, transparency, and procedural fairness. The homeowner, while maintaining a low profile, observed the transformation with quiet satisfaction. The tools, monitors, and organized materials of the man cave had proven their worth, converting a private conflict into a public triumph. Karen's campaign of intimidation had not only failed, but it inadvertently facilitated a shift toward accountability and collective empowerment. The fallout from the public exposure reverberated through the neighborhood like a shockwave. Karen, previously confident in her ability to control and intimidate, now faced the undeniable reality of her diminished influence. The HOA board, caught between procedural violations and a community that had awakened to its rights, scrambled to regain authority, but their attempts only underscored their incompetence. The homeowner, having meticulously planned every step, knew that the final chapter would require patience, vigilance, and strategic action to ensure that the changes were permanent, not fleeting. In the days following the meeting, Karen's attempts to retaliate became increasingly transparent and desperate. Letters were sent disputing claims, emails were circulated, questioning the homeowner's intentions, and informal neighborhood gossip was used in a last-ditch effort to regain control. Yet every communication she sent was met with the homeowner's preparedness. Each letter, email, and claim was logged, timestamped, and added to the ever-growing archive that had already served as the backbone of the community's awareness. This meticulous documentation turned Karen's attempts at intimidation into evidence of her ongoing harassment, further weakening her position. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself had transformed. Residents, previously silent and cautious, now engaged openly with the HOA. Questions about budget allocations, enforcement procedures, and architectural rules were no longer deferred or dismissed. The homeowner had sparked not just an but a cultural shift. The community began actively participating in governance, demanding accountability, and insisting on transparency. The shift in power was palpable. Karen's influence waned with every question asked, every procedural challenge raised, and every neighborhood discussion that questioned arbitrary enforcement. The homeowner took careful steps to formalize this transformation. A series of informal neighborhood committees were established to review HOA decisions, monitor enforcement actions, and ensure that future fines or citations were applied fairly and consistently. By empowering residents to take part in oversight, the homeowner created a structure in which the HOA as authority could no longer operate unchecked. Karen's previous tactics using fear and intimidation were neutralized by collective vigilance and structured accountability. Legal safeguards were also put in place. The homeowner consulted with municipal offices and reviewed state statutes governing HOA enforcement and homeowner rights. Written guides and resources were distributed to residents, ensuring that everyone understood their legal protections and how to respond to future disputes. By institutionalizing knowledge, the homeowner ensured that Karen's influence could not reassert itself through ignorance or confusion. The community was no longer dependent on a single individual for advocacy. The tools, strategies, and legal awareness were now embedded in the neighborhood's collective memory. The Mancave, once a private sanctuary, remained central to the homeowner's strategy. It continued to serve as the repository of evidence, a hub for planning, and a symbol of persistence. Residents who visited were often shown the organized files, charts, and video documentation, which not only reinforced the narrative of past abuses, but also provided reassurance that any future disputes could be managed proactively. The garage had evolved from a personal project into a community asset, a tangible reminder that preparation, documentation, and strategic thinking could protect homeowners from arbitrary authority. As weeks turned into months, Karen's attempts at retaliation dwindled. Letters were ignored, emails unanswered, and gossip lost credibility in the face of documented evidence. Other board members, observing the community's newfound engagement, began to adopt more transparent practices, realizing that resistance to accountability was no longer viable. The HOA, once a source of fear and frustration, gradually transformed into an organization governed by procedure, fairness, and resident participation. Karen, stripped of her power, became a cautionary tale of how obsession with control and disregard for community norms could backfire spectacularly. The homeowner, however, did not become complacent. Understanding that lasting change required maintenance, he continued to monitor HOA actions, review meeting minutes, and maintain open lines of communication with neighbors. By demonstrating consistent vigilance, he ensured that the culture of accountability and transparency would endure beyond a single conflict. Diman, Kabi, still fully equipped and organized, remained a strategic hub, ready to address any future challenges while also serving as a symbol of the homeowner's commitment to fairness. The neighborhood, once passive, now embraced a culture of proactive engagement. Residents attended meetings regularly, asked informed questions, and held the board accountable for every decision. The arbitrary citations and micromanaging behavior that had characterized Karen's influence were replaced by procedural fairness, open dialogue, and collaborative governance. The homeowner, as strategic exposure, had not only addressed a personal grievance, but it catalyzed a transformation in community dynamics that would endure for years. The garage itself, now fully organized and functioning as a man cave, stood as both a personal accomplishment and a community symbol. Every tool neatly arranged, every shelf labeled, and every piece of documentation carefully stored represented a victory achieved through preparation, strategic thinking, and patience. It was a testament to the homeowner's perseverance and a reminder that one determined individual could challenge authority, inspire collective action, and reshape the rules of engagement in their neighborhood. By the end of this chapter, Karen's reign of intimidation had ended. The HOA had adopted more transparent practices, and the community had found its voice. The homeowner's project, initially a private endeavor to reclaim control over his garage, had evolved into a broader movement for accountability, fairness, and community empowerment. The lessons learned were clear.